Hello, Ariana. So I'm going to talk a little bit about your 5 characteristics of light posting, just to give you some real-time recorded feedback. So we'll get the screen sharing going here. Move over a little bit. And all right. Well, first of all, great. You included your name, which is important. Don't forget that. A few people forgot that. I'm glad you did that. Also, you know, as I kind of skimmed through very quickly, I'm noticing that you're doing the sort of tags to your images. I really appreciate that. It says that you're listening to what we're looking for. These projects are largely sort of, you know, experiments. And so the data and the information that you're getting out of them is important. We want to be creative. We want the images to look beautiful and lovely. But at the same time, it is important that you're paying attention to, you know, the sort of techniques and the stuff that you're learning as you go. So let's take a look at direction here. Position 1, 2. Now what we're looking for here, first and foremost, is evidence that the light is moving. And that's a kind of a key thing in what we're studying with direction, is how where the light is affects the overall mood and look of the image. And clearly you're moving them very nicely around. The compositions are quite good. I think I mentioned this to you in studio when I was seeing some of the images through your lens, that your use of the entire picture plane, your use of the entire frame is excellent. Very, very good. It's clear that you're thinking not just of the middle of the image or just one area, but the whole image. Also, your attention to some of the shadow areas, things like this, other areas where you're literally, you know, just sort of creating shapes out of shadows, through the roof. Awesome. This is just really, really good stuff, Ariana. I'm very happy to see how you are using shadows and how we are using highlights in order to compose, rather than just trying to identify the shape of a bottle. This is taking it an extra step above the technique that you're clearly showing here. Now let's look at intensity, which again, you start off with the key light, the direction, only this time you're choosing any random direction. And then you're adding that other light at a lower intensity, which is the fill light. And that we still should be getting a sense of where the light is coming from, the main light. And that fill light is really just to sort of supplement or highlight those shadows a little bit. 1 to 2, 100%. Wow, yeah, I like you're even sort of showing that you're turning down or dialing in that information. You know why this is important? This is important because you'll want to repeat results sometimes. You'll find an image and you're shooting away, and then you're like, how did I do that? And if you don't know how to do it, it's like, oh, man, you're missed an opportunity. So that you're paying that close of attention to what you're doing is excellent. Very, very good. So image-wise itself, I'd say these compositions are a little less intense than the other ones. In other words, I think you didn't quite take these as far creatively as the first group, with the exception of maybe this one. This is really kind of, again, getting back to that idea where you're using shape and shadow. But the techniques are good, and I really appreciate your including all of the information. Just not as I guess, bold with your compositional choices there. Now here with temperature, you're doing the right thing technically, but this happens a lot. When you start to work with the camera, you start to work with the camera controls, sometimes we forget to pay attention to the other stuff as well. And I think that might have been what's going on here, because all of a sudden you're doing the same composition over and over again. And I know that you're, you know, very good at doing, putting together a beautiful composition, because you showed evidence of that. But for some reason, you were doing the same composition, just different lighting. And that's absolutely not what we wanted. Now, in other exercises, we're going to want that exactly. We're going to want a repetition, but not in this one. And so I would say, let's go back and find images that are not the same composition. and switch those out so that we don't have this repetition of the same composition over and over again. Otherwise, your exploration of the various color settings is suited, and it's right on. Now with contrast, what we're talking about here is a single light and then reflecting. And so we'll look at those and see how those are going. Very nice. These are much farther away as well. Again, you know, I'm wanting those beautiful, amazing compositions you did with direction, just with these. Now, this gets toward there. I mean, that is starting to get toward that sort of whole frame compositional strategy that you were using before. This does as well, as does this. But when we get back into images like this, it just doesn't work in the same way. They're not quite as powerful. So while the techniques, I can see you've got the light coming from this direction, you've got a card on the other side, it's all working quite well. I think creativity and composition kind of falls off a little bit on these other ones. These look good, though. The first couple look very good. It's hard. I know it's hard to sustain that level, but you really did hit a home run on those first ones, direction, and I would like to see that continue forward on all of your images. It's clear that you know what you're doing. It's just a matter of whether you can collect enough images that sustain that high level. Hardness. Now, hardness is the shadows. What we're talking about here is whether the edges of the shadows are soft or whether they're sharp. And since we're doing, you know, a variety where the fill light is diffused and the key light is not diffused, we will oftentimes see a combination, and that's what's going to give you a kind of a richness in your imagery, where some shadows are soft and other shadows are hard. It really creates a complexity that is quite beautiful to look at. And what we would see, again, is where you would have just one of the lights, like the fill diffused. We're seeing soft shadows here and then hard shadows here. That's exactly what you would see where you have just one diffused. Here, the key light is diffused. And so you're getting a softer shadows on the main light source, and then the fill light becomes less. Now, here's what can happen sometimes, and I think is going on in this image, is so you put the diffuser over the key light, the main light source. By putting that filter over it, you're actually reducing the brightness of that key light because there's something in front of it. Then you have the fill light, which is only supposed to supplement it a little bit. And so then what ends up happening is you have a filter over the key, no filter over the fill light, and the fill light kind of starts to take over. It's too bright. So the idea would be to turn down the intensity of the unfiltered fill light so that it doesn't overwhelm the image and become another key light. So I think that's what happened here, where you've got the fill and it's creating these tremendously bright areas here. Technically, you're doing the right thing. I would just, in the future, as you're looking at this, start to think the fill light definitely needs to be less bright than the key, always. And so if you put something over the key light, the main light source, you have to compensate the unfiltered fill in order to keep it being a fill. Otherwise, it takes over the scene. Let's take a look at what your peers had to say. It appears few of your photos were out of focus. Yeah, that can happen sometimes where you're looking and you think it's in focus because you're looking at this tiny screen. That just happens sometimes. You'll have to get accustomed to what a sharp image looks like. On your camera, there is a mechanism for zooming in a little bit to see whether it's in focus or not. I'll show you that if you haven't discovered it already. A few of your work is well done and methodical. Your direction was spot on. And yes, the direction was spot on. It's one of the best ones that I've seen in the class so far. Your direction was outstanding. Some of the others, as I had mentioned, the compositions weren't quite as good, but it looks like the techniques were all sort of understood. It's just, I would say that creativity-wise, that they fell off after that amazing direction. So you'll also receive a numerical grade. I'll do a sort of a grade sheet for you. But I thought this would be helpful just to get some feedback on what I'm seeing with your photographs. So keep shooting and we'll see you in class. Right on.